Hello and welcome to another Imperator Rome suggestions video. It's been quite a while since I last made one of these, but that hasn't been for lack of trying. I've had a trade system rework in script hellscape for a few months now, and as of yet been unable to really articulate clearly what it is I want to convey, so I decided to shelf it for now and go after mercenaries instead. So this is my video on my suggestion on how Imperator Rome could rework mercenaries to be a little bit more engaging, a little bit more flavorful, and have them integrate more with areas of the game that they currently don't. So, I feel the need to preface this with a bit of a disclaimer. If you like that you can see mercenary companies on the map, then you're probably not going to like my suggestion for how the mercenary system could be changed. And because this is such an important part of my change, I also think that the likelihood of this being implemented in the game is much smaller than it otherwise would be. Also, this is a complete overhaul of the way that mercenaries work, and I feel it is more historically authentic than what is currently implemented. Though, as I am not a historian, you can feel free to correct me on some areas that I am inevitably going to get wrong in the comment section below. I try to use historical examples of how armies in antiquity used foreign troops in how I designed this system, and while I haven't of course seen a full history encompassing every single battle and army ever fielded in this period, my changes do not contradict any that I do know of. So with all that out of the way, what are my changes? First off, mercenaries are no longer individual armies that stand around on the map ready to be purchased and fielded to fight beside your own armies. The system that is currently in place really encourages the player to search around for the best general he can find, sometimes hiring mercs from many nations away, sometimes in hostile territory, just to get that sweet 15 marshal that will give you a tactics advantage in your upcoming conflict. This system is really very gamey, both in its implementation and the way that the players use them. I would entirely rip this part out of the game. So what would I then replace it with? What is my ingenious plan to introduce foreign troops into your war efforts? Well, for starters, think of the way that the Roman Republic's armies worked. These armies frequently made use of allied Gallic and Italic mercenaries, often taking up the cavalry roles that was something that the Romans were, in this period, relatively weak at. Think of the likes of Carthage. Their army was primarily made up of mercenary soldiers, often vastly outnumbering the number of citizen soldiers many times over. Armies were almost never made up of men from one single background, as they often are in Imperator. And as one cannot merge mercenary armies with your regular armies, they do not accurately represent the realities of so many battles of this time period, where armies were made up of a coalition of forces. Now, you could argue that you would just move these armies adjacently and have them fight battles coming in together, but really, that's just getting around a problem in the system rather than fixing the problem itself. So how would I fix this systematic problem? Instead of mercenaries being solid, unchanging armies that are bought via finding them on the map or scrolling through a list, mercenary cohorts would be bought or loaned from nations directly. If you are playing as, for example, Carthage, and you start fighting against Rome, the nations that are hostile or wary of Rome could come to you and offer you a few cohorts of troops, either for a price if they're feeling particularly mercantile, or for free if they see Rome as an existential threat to their nation. A few months after accepting such a deal, a few cohorts of troops would arrive in your nation, that you would be then free to do with as you wish. These cohorts would come out of the gifting nation's manpower pool, and would not be troops that had been already trained. They would be completely new. To differentiate these cohorts from ones from your own nation, we could colour the cohorts like we currently have with tribal retinues and migratory units, just changing the background colour. I would recommend gold as the colour of choice here. These troops would primarily be merged with your own armies, supplementing your forces perhaps in an area that you're weak in. As Rome, for example, your heavy infantry are incredible, with boni from military traditions really heavily boosting them. However, there are fewer boni to your cavalry, and perhaps you wish to implement mercenary cavalry into your heavy infantry legions. These units would use the tech and inventions of the parent nation, not your own. So making friends with a bunch of Greek city-states may be worth your while instead of just annexing them. Now, an issue I can envisage here is the player merging up all the different mercenary units into a big army mercenary doomstack and using that as a manpower-free sledgehammer of sorts. My way around this would not be making that kind of strategy impossible, but to make it have consequences. These mercenary cohorts would have a reduced reinforcement rate, and at the end of the war these mercenaries are involved in, if they take casualties that are disproportionate to your own perhaps, the owner may be far less likely to support you in the future. So how would you go about requesting these troops? Surely it can't be a case of clicking on each country individually and having some new Diplo interaction. Yeah, you're right. It can't be that, because that sounds awful. I would retool the mercenary screen for this. Instead of showing you all the now non-existent mercenary standing armies on the map, it would instead show a list of countries that would be willing to send you some soldiers. This could be sorted by the country's military tech level, by the cost that these countries will be asking for their troops, by the amount of troops they're willing to give you, and perhaps some other things I'm not thinking of too. Now, you might be wondering, well, I've just started a war. What stops me from just going to this screen and hiring every single mercenary on there, especially if some are free? Well, what I envisage is that for each group of cohorts you get from another nation as mercenaries, the willingness of other nations to give you troops goes down slightly. So if you grab, say, 12 cohorts of cavalry from Boy as Rome, maybe the Insubres would no longer be willing to send you their own troops. Maybe the relations between different nations has an impact on whether they'll send you troops as well. Insubres may hate the Boy and will definitely not be sending troops to support your war effort if there will be some boys in there. Now, why would Boy send you troops in the first place, and why would you as the player send troops to any other nation? Well, the most obvious benefit is definitely the payment you might receive, and as a player you might be interested in seeing someone weakened, but I didn't feel this was quite enough, so there is the added incentive of a boost to your military experience, because naturally if you have troops all fighting in wars, they're going to become quite a bit more experienced than they otherwise would be. Now, these wouldn't be troops that you've already raised, so I would probably add some timed modifier like maybe for 2 years after the culmination of a war your troops have taken part in, you'd get plus 15% or plus 25% unit starting experience. These rewards need to be balanced so that they're both something a player will want to engage in and is worth spending manpower on, but not so rewarding that it's a no-brainer to spend the manpower on it every single time. A balance must be struck. Now, I want to go a little bit further here too, and I would suggest that this system also replace the way that client states and feudatories work. Instead of these vassal types having their own standing armies as they do now, and especially instead of them having their own standing armies plus several orders of magnitude more troops in the form of mercenary spam, these vassals would instead be a source of these special mercenary cohorts. These vassal cohorts would be the entirety of the vassals' armed land forces, and there would not be roaming miniature stacks of Athenians fighting you if you went to war with Phrygia. The Athenian military would be fighting in Phrygian armies. This would very much fit in well with the Roman socii, the Roman allies like the Etrurians and the Samnites, and would have these vassal troops work slightly differently to the other mercenary cohorts. Instead of being disbanded and going back to their country of origin after a war, these troops would stick around with your armies under your control until you decide to get rid of them. I'd have the background of vassal mercenaries coloured differently to the others to differentiate them, but in all other instances they would work the same. Right. But what if you're playing as a vassal? What if I am playing as Athens and I want to raise an army? What I would suggest here is that the player still be free to create cohorts, but your overlord will get rather pissy about it, and wondering about all the build-up of strength. I can see events where the overlord demands that the vassals stand down his army, with the player getting an option of telling said overlord to stuff it, for a popularity boost and a major hit to vassal loyalty, or accepting the demands of the overlord for an opinion boost and the army being disbanded. If this is an AI vassal, then perhaps they would only start raising their own troops if their loyalty went disloyal. But that's not all. I would also implement a system where characters can also come join you in your war effort. Say the Diadochi Wars are in full swing and you as Sparta really want to see Phrygia come out on top, as that Macedon is still a bit scary on your border and you kind of want to see that land become your land. Well, then you can send any currently unemployed character in your nation to Phrygia to act as a general, if Phrygia wants to use him. If they do, then you'll get an opinion boost with Phrygia. I'd also see you getting an event pop up where a character requests your permission to aid X nation in their war, and you can give your blessings for an opinion boost with the nation the character is helping, or you can deny it for an opinion penalty both with the character and the nation, and possibly a tyranny hit too. This event could be supplemented with trait-specific options. For example, the crafty trait could give you the option of requesting payment from the recipient nation for the services of your character. The generous trait could give you the option to also give money or cohorts to the recipient nation for a much larger opinion boost, etc, etc. Opinion boosts don't seem like such a major benefit with the way the game is right now, but when you think that with my changes, opinion will make such a big difference to whether a nation will want to send you mercenaries at all, you can see how these boni become much more valuable. So what, you may shout, I never use mercenaries anyway. This changes nothing for me. I won't nurture my relations with other nations to possibly get cohorts from them in a war. Well, dear viewer, I would also be making that slightly harder to do. The AI would be making use of this system, so you may be fighting armies much larger than you're used to, though you will be fighting much fewer of them, as they would instead of being several armies, or several dozen if you're fighting someone with many vassals, be merged into larger armies. I would also be reducing the amount of men you can personally field, somewhat softly forcing you to make use of this system. I would do this in a few ways. Firstly, manpower is taking another hit. Even with the big nerfs to manpower that have come recently, it's still at a point where you gain far too much. But more than that, there is a problem with how manpower is spent. With the introduction of food, taking attrition has become something that kinda just doesn't happen anymore. As long as you have the food, you can just spend manpower purely on combat. This will be changed in my rework, such that if you're going through a desert or over a mountain range, or caught in a snow or sandstorm, you will be taking attrition, even if you have food. If you're sieging a fortress and you roll a 0 on your siege tick, you'll take attrition as sickness makes its way through your siege camp. This change would both nerf the amount of manpower available in the world and increase the ways in which it is spent. To get around this, you'll have to make use of allied troops in a war. So, how would this change the game diplomatically? Well, right now we're in a bit of a situation where relations are kind of irrelevant. The cost of maintaining friendly relations with other countries is quite a lot higher than it's entirely worth right now, which may change if high relations directly equated to more military might, as you basically get free troops from nations who like you. I would hope that this would encourage improving relations, though I imagine the political influence cost may need changing to something else instead. However, that's not what this video is about, and I'm sure I'll come up with some other overhaul video for diplomacy somewhere down the line. The wheels are already turning on that one, in fact. Anyway, to summarize, my idea is that mercenaries would not be the flavorless armies stood around the map awaiting employment, but instead a result of the dynamic relations that nations on the map have with one another. As far as flavor goes, I feel like this really has a lot more potential than the current system, and it encourages interaction with areas of the game that can be largely ignored right now. I hope you like my suggestion, and if you have any suggestions of your own, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.